You know, usually when we talk about bringing an animal into our homes, there's this expectation of a very simple, almost purely emotional reaction.
Right, like an instant aesthetic reflex.
Exactly. It's akin to buying a painting for your living room. You walk into a room, you see a striking bird or, a really colorful fish, and your brain just fires off this immediate signal like, wow, I love that. I want to look at that every day.
Yeah, most people just don't overthink it at all. We're drawn to bright colors and appealing shapes, and we make a binary judgment right then and there.
It's pleasing or it's not.
Exactly. But the deeper you plunge into any specialized field, the more that simple binary of pretty or ugly just dissolves.
It shatters completely.
It really does. It dissolves into an absolute gauntlet of hyper-specific criteria. What a beginner finds gorgeous, the veteran practitioner might just completely dismiss.
And that bizarre disconnect is exactly what we're exploring today. We've pulled together today's source material specifically for you, knowing you love to bypass the surface level and figure out the why behind these hyper-focused worlds.
We're looking at a very specific, deeply opinionated corner of the internet today.
Yeah, it's a blog post or essentially a public diary entry from an internet writer who goes by the name Aang.
And we should point out, this isn't just some casual weekend update. The entry we're analyzing is literally titled Notes on Fishkeeping, Part 248.
Part 248. Let's just pause on that for a second. Think about your own life, your own passions. Do you have 248 written, published entries on anything?
I definitely don't.
Right. To reach that volume of documentation, you have moved way past treating this as a casual interest. You are operating on a completely different level of observation.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to figure out why a particular fish, a fish that is wildly, undeniably popular across the entire aquarium hobby, is actively, almost casually, disliked by this dedicated veteran.
It's a fantastic puzzle. But to genuinely understand Aang's rejection of this creature, we have to first construct a clear picture of why the broader community is so obsessed with it.
Right. We have to visualize the appeal before we can tear it down. So, we are talking about a creature known as the Boeseman's rainbowfish.
Or Melanotaenia boesemani, if we're sticking to the scientific designation.
Let's look at the physical description Aang provides in these notes because it is undeniably striking. This fish is famous for a very specific half and half coloration.
Yeah, the visual contrast described in the text is quite severe, actually. The front half of the fish, from the nose to roughly the midpoint of the body, is typically a muted bluish gray.
Almost an industrial, understated slate color.
That's a good way to picture it. But then, as you move to the back half of the fish, particularly around the rear fins and the tail, it abruptly transitions into this vibrant, explosive orange or yellow.
It's startling. When I was reading Aang's entry and looking at the details, I kept trying to find a real-world equivalent for why that looks so appealing to us.
Did you come up with one?
Well, the best analogy I could come up with is one of those custom split paint jobs you sometimes see on classic cars or hot rods. Have you seen those?
I'm familiar with the concept, yeah. But walk me through the mechanics of why you think that applies here.
So imagine a restorer is working on a vintage car. Instead of blending the colors with a smooth gradient, they paint the entire front end this cool metallic slate gray.
Okay, the industrial look.
Right. Then, right down the middle of the doors, there is a sharp, unyielding vertical line, and the entire back end is painted a blinding neon yellow.
That's a very abrupt color division.
It is. But wait, I'm actually stuck on this idea. Why do we love that sharp line? In nature, we usually see gradients.
Like counter shading.
Yeah, where a dark back gently fades into a light belly for camouflage. So shouldn't a sharp, unnatural line straight down the middle of an animal just look broken to our brains?
What's fascinating here is that the broken aspect is exactly why it commands our attention.
Really?
Yeah. Our visual processing systems are trained by evolution to ignore gradients and camouflage. Gradients tell our brain, this is part of the background, keep scanning. But a stark, high-contrast vertical split completely interrupts that visual scanning process. It's a jarring disruption of expectations.
It forces the eye to stop moving.
Exactly. It anchors on that specific point.
Yeah.
And Aang's notes highlight that this disruptive coloration is actually compounded by another anatomical anomaly.
The double dorsal fins.
Yes.
Aang specifically flags this, pointing out that having two dorsal fins is actually quite unique in the standard aquarium world. But let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
We're talking about a glass box full of water. Is a single fin versus a double fin really making that much of a difference to someone looking at their living room tank?
I mean, it sounds minor on paper.
Right. It sounds like a detail only a biologist would care about.
I would argue it makes a massive subconscious difference, even to the most casual observer.
Okay, how so?
Think about the standard silhouette we associate with a fish. A child drawing a fish gives it one prominent fin on top.
Sure, the classic shark fin shape, just scaled down.
That single fin creates a predictable curve. A double dorsal fin completely alters the geometry of the animal. It creates a jagged, almost serrated architectural profile in the water.
Oh, I see.
Now, take that jagged silhouette and combine it with the disruptive half-and-half color split we just talked about.
Okay, I'm starting to see the picture. You're putting a neon, jagged geometric shape into an environment that is otherwise totally organic.
Precisely the opposite of camouflage. The baseline aesthetic of a home aquarium is usually a lot of flowing green plants, rounded brown rocks, dark driftwood.
It's very soft.
It's a soft, monochromatic, organic theater. Dropping a Melanotaenia boesemani into that setup is like placing a piece of high-contrast modern art into a rustic cabin.
It refuses to blend in.
It is engineered to be a focal point, which perfectly explains the massive popular demand. The casual hobbyist walks into a store, their eye is instantly snagged by that visual anchor, and they want it for their home.
They want that striking, two-toned classic car parked right in their living room. It's a living showpiece.
Exactly.
So we've established that this creature is a triumph of static aesthetics. It looks incredible. But Aang's diary entry doesn't let us just stare at it like a painting. We get this sudden, vivid glimpse into its dynamic behavior.
It's where things shift.
Yeah. Aang is at the local fish shop picking up supplies, sees these new arrivals in the dealer's tank, and decides to snap a quick photo for the blog.
And that single mundane action triggers a massive behavioral response. The camera flash goes off.
Right, and the fish don't just ignore it. They don't just keep lazily swimming around.
No, they react immediately.
Aang notes that the immediate reaction was for the fish to retreat to the very back of the tank and tightly stick close to one another. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Let's hear it.
Because it is so incredibly easy, almost tempting, to fall into the trap of viewing an aquarium as just a decorative piece of furniture. We curate the rocks, we arrange the lighting, we pick the fish based on their colors, treating them like decorative throw pillows.
The aesthetic commodification of a living organism.
Exactly. But Aang's simple act of taking a smartphone photo instantly shatters that illusion. That flash of light activated an ancient, hardwired survival instinct.
Absolutely.
Aang writes that these are schooling fish and that they explicitly need to be kept in a minimum group of at least 6 to, quote, feel secure in a tank.
I want to focus heavily on that phrase, to feel secure. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to unpack the deep psychology of the schooling instinct. And it is crucial that we don't misinterpret this.
Let me jump in there because I can easily see someone hearing, they need to feel secure and rolling their eyes.
Oh, definitely. Thinking it's just sentimentality.
Yeah, thinking, oh, come on, it's a fish. We aren't talking about them needing a warm hug and words of affirmation.
Right.
When my dog gets startled by a loud noise, he hides under the couch to feel secure. Are we just projecting our own mammalian anxiety onto a creature that just flinched at a bright light?
It's a fair challenge, but the mechanism here is vastly different from a dog hiding under a couch.
How is it different?
A dog hiding is seeking physical cover. For a schooling fish, the cover is the physical presence of its own kind.
Oh, interesting.
In their native biology, isolation equals immediate vulnerability. This isn't an emotional preference for socializing. It is a cold, mathematical defensive strategy.
Mathematical. Walk me through that. How is huddling together a math equation?
Think about the camera flash. To the fish's sensory network, that sudden burst of light isn't a smartphone. It's a potential predator striking.
Okay, sure.
If a fish is entirely alone in that tank, the predator has only one target. The probability of being eaten is 100%.
Ah, okay. The odds are entirely against you.
But if that fish retreats and instantly merges into a tight cluster with 5 others, it has immediately diluted its individual risk.
Oh, wow.
The predator now has to visually isolate one target out of a chaotic, shifting mass of contrasting colors. And remember that half-and-half pattern we discussed?
Yeah, the split colors.
It suddenly becomes a weapon of confusion.
Ooh. So that jarring vertical split paint job actually makes it harder to track an individual fish when they are all swarming together. The visual anchor becomes a visual scramble.
That's the brilliance of it. But the psychological baseline is the numbers game. When Eng states that they require a minimum group size of 6, that is not an arbitrary suggestion for creating a prettier display.
It's a biological rule?
Yes, it is the minimum threshold for their nervous systems to register that the mathematical odds of survival are acceptable.
So if you ignore that rule, say you are that casual buyer who just wants one beautiful half-and-half fish for a small desk tank.
Right, which happens all the time.
What happens to that single fish?
Without that critical mass of at least 6, the animal cannot switch off its threat response. It exists in a perpetual state of hyperarousal and instinctual terror.
That's awful.
It is constantly waiting for a strike that it knows mathematically it cannot evade.
That is genuinely unsettling. You go from looking at a beautiful, vibrant piece of modern art to realizing that if you isolate it because you only wanted one decorative object, you are basically subjecting a complex organism to a life of chronic panic.
Which is precisely why the perspective of a veteran hobbyist like Ang is so invaluable.
Absolutely.
When Ang snapped that photo, they weren't just annoyed that the fish darted out of frame. They were reading the biological code. They saw the reaction, decoded the instinct, and recognized the absolute, non-negotiable need for that minimum school of 6.
It really highlights the gap between passing interest and true expertise. By the time you are writing part 248 of a journal, you've stopped seeing colors and you've started seeing mechanics.
You see the invisible rules governing the tank.
You are no longer easily distracted by the shiny surface.
Exactly.
Which sets us up perfectly to tackle the core tension of this entire deep dive. We've built this fish up.
We have.
We know it has visually arresting half-and-half colors. We know it features unique, jagged, double dorsal fins.
We know it has this complex, fascinating schooling behavior that relies on the mathematics of survival.
Yet, despite all of this undeniable appeal, Aang explicitly writes in the diary that they are simply not their cup of tea.
A completely unfazed dismissal of a universally beloved creature.
And what blows my mind is the reason for the dismissal. Aang doesn't say they're too hard to keep alive.
Right.
They don't claim the fish are overly aggressive or that those vibrant colors fade away under aquarium lights.
No, the critique is entirely structural.
Aang writes, quote, "Honestly, I find their body shape a bit odd, especially since that flat frame tends to become heavily arched as they get older.
It is a purely architectural grievance.
The entire rejection hinges on skeletal curvature over time. So what does this all mean? I have to admit I struggle to wrap my head around this level of pickiness.
It is incredibly specific.
We're talking about an animal with stunning colors and unique fins, and Aang is essentially saying, yeah, but its posture gets bad when it's old, so I'm out. Are we really holding a fish to an orthopedic standard?
Wait.
Why be so incredibly dismissive over a spine getting a little arched?
This raises an important question about the fundamental difference between the way a consumer experiences time versus how an expert experiences time. You have to consider the environment where the vast majority of people encounter these fish.
You mean the local dealer's shop?
Yes, the brightly lit tanks, the rows of aquariums. The casual hobbyist walks into that shop and makes a purchasing decision based entirely on a snapshot.
A single moment in time.
Exactly. They are looking at the fish in its present state, which is almost always when the animal is quite young.
Oh, I see.
At that juvenile stage, the Boeseman's rainbowfish possesses that exact, streamlined, flat frame Aang mentions.
So the buyer is looking at a perfectly flat, brilliantly colored canvas and buying it on the spot.
They are buying the immediate aesthetic gratification, but they are entirely blind to the timeline of the organism.
Because things change.
As these fish age, that flat frame is not permanent. The physical geometry of the animal warps. The back becomes heavily arched, changing the entire silhouette of the creature in the water.
That's fascinating.
Aang is rejecting the fish because Aang refuses to evaluate it solely as a snapshot.
It's like, okay, I think I have an analogy for this. Tell me if this tracks.
Go for it.
It's like a dedicated sneakerhead. A casual person walks into a shoe store, sees a sneaker with a great colorway, and buys it immediately. They just see a cool shoe.
Right.
But the veteran sneakerhead looks at that same shoe and refuses to buy it because they know the specific type of foam used in the midsole is going to visibly crease and yellow after 6 months of walking.
That is an excellent parallel. The casual buyer sees the present color. The veteran sees the inevitable structural degradation.
Or like a coffee snob.
Oh, yes.
Someone who turns down a beautifully poured, visually perfect latte at a cafe because they can tell by the texture that the microfoam structure is going to entirely collapse into a flat, watery mess in about 5 minutes.
Yes, they aren't judging the coffee as it sits on the counter. They are judging its trajectory.
Exactly.
And it requires a massive amount of experience and likely a history of making mistakes to train your eye to see that trajectory.
Right.
You have to buy the wrong shoes, drink the collapsing lattes, and watch the flat fish become arched before you learn to prioritize structure over immediate flash.
That makes total sense.
Aang knows that the vibrant orange rear, the muted bluish-gray front, and the double dorsal fins, no matter how arresting they are today, simply cannot compensate for a mature body shape that they fundamentally find unappealing.
It speaks volumes about the evolution of a hobbyist's standards. When you start out, you are desperate for color. You just want the brightest thing in the tank.
You're distracted by the shiny object.
Right. But when you are a veteran on your 248th journal entry, you are looking past the scales. You are looking at bone structure. You are confronting the reality of the organism's entire life cycle.
And notice the tone Aang uses. There is no anger, no grand crusade against the fish.
Yeah, it's very calm.
Just not quite my cup of tea, and body shape a bit odd. It is the quiet, unshakable confidence of empirical observation.
That's a great way to put it.
Aang can stand in a crowded fish shop, watch everyone else eagerly scoop these fish into plastic bags based on a fleeting burst of color, and simply walk away.
Totally secure in the knowledge of what those fish will look like 3 years down the road. What an absolute journey we've taken from such a brief diary entry.
It really is incredible how much is packed in there.
We started by trying to understand the massive popular appeal of Melanotaenia boesemani, dissecting how that muted gray and vibrant yellow half-and-half coloration acts as a jarring visual anchor.
We examined the architectural anomaly of their double dorsal fins.
We unpacked the grim mathematical reality behind their schooling behavior and how a minimum of 6 is required to silence the instinctual terror triggered by something as simple as a camera flash.
And finally, we arrived at the ultimate snobbery, and I use that word affectionately, of the veteran's eye.
Right. We explored how a lifetime of observation leads someone to reject a beautiful creature simply because they know its flat frame will inevitably succumb to a heavily arched reality. It really goes to show how much depth is buried in the casual opinions of dedicated people.
There is an entire philosophy of observation layered into those few paragraphs.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, we want to turn this directly over to you. We've all got our hyper-specific niches. Think about your own areas of expertise, your passions, the things you've devoted countless hours to understanding.
What is your heavily arched fish?
Yeah. What is the universally beloved, wildly popular thing in your field that everyone else just throws their money at, but you, with your trained eye and your uncompromising long-term perspective, just can't stand because you can already see the structural flaws that will eventually reveal themselves.
It is a phenomenal exercise in examining our own biases and our own growth. And I think Aang's entry leaves us with one final, broader thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
I'd love to hear it.
We've spent a lot of time talking about a fish whose appealing, flat, useful frame inevitably warps and arches as it ages. It forces us to ask a difficult question about our own lives.
Okay.
When we curate our personal environments, whether it's the pets we bring into our homes, the long-term career projects we commit to, or even the friends and partners we invited to our social circles, are we only welcoming them as they exist in this appealing present moment?
Well,
Or are we truly deeply prepared to embrace the inevitable, sometimes odd ways they will change, arch, and transform as the years go by?
it turns out true appreciation isn't just about liking the bright colors you see today. It's about being willing to stick around for the shape of things tomorrow.